King Leopold II, How One King Bought a Country and Bled It Dry. What do you get when you mix royal ambition, jungle deception, and a rubber-fueled empire of terror? A king with no real power, a continent carved up like a Sunday roast, and a humanitarian mask so thin it couldn't hide a paper cut. Welcome to the twisted tale of King Leopold II, the monarch who wanted a colony so badly he'd bought one like it was on clearance. But how did a European king end up ruling a land 8 times the size of his own country? Why were Congolese chiefs signing treaties they couldn't read for beads and cloth? And what kind of administrator decorates his garden with severed heads? From Stanley's magical mystery contracts to rubber, blood, and the Chicote Symphony, this story has it all. Deception, diplomacy, mutilation, and a literary rebellion featuring Mark Twain, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Joseph Conrad. So buckle up, history lovers. You're about to witness the great Congo heist, where greed wore a crown and justice took decades to arrive. What was the real cost of Leopold's empire? Why did 10 million people vanish under his rule? And how did the world finally say enough? Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and follow us for more jaw-dropping stories from history's darkest corners. Once upon a time in 1865, a man named Leopold II inherited the Belgian throne. Belgium was a baby nation, fresh out of its breakup with the Netherlands, and trying to figure out its place in the world. Leopold, however, had big dreams. Not let's build a nice park dreams. No, he wanted an empire, a colony, something to put Belgium on the map and himself in the history books. But there was a catch. Belgium was a constitutional monarchy. Translation? Leopold had about as much political power as a decorative garden gnome. Parliament wasn't interested in colonial adventures. They thought imperialism was so last century. So Leopold did what any ambitious monarch would do. He went rogue. Leopold's eyes sparkled when he looked at Africa, specifically the Congo Basin, a vast, resource-rich region that was largely unclaimed by European powers. But how does one snatch up a country without looking like a villain? Easy, you throw a party. In 1876, Leopold hosted a geographical conference in Brussels. It was like a TED Talk for imperialists. There, he proposed the creation of the Association Internationale Africaine, AIA, a supposedly philanthropic organization dedicated to ending slavery and bringing civilization to the uncivilized. Spoiler alert, it was a front. A very fancy, very deceptive front. By 1879, the AIA had morphed into the Association Internationale du Congo, and Leopold was ready to roll. But he needed boots on the ground. Enter Henry Morton Stanley, a journalist turned explorer who had already trekked through the Congo and had a taste for adventure and profit. Leopold hired Stanley to build infrastructure, make treaties with local chiefs, often under duress or deception, and lay the groundwork for what would become the Congo Free State. Stanley was the colonial handyman, hammering together Leopold's empire with bridges, roads, and a whole lot of manipulation. In 1882, Henry Morton Stanley, our explorer with a mustache sharp enough to slice through jungle vines, returned to the Congo like a door-to-door salesman with a briefcase full of treaties. His mission? To convince over 500 Congolese chiefs to sign away their lands, rights, and souls to King Leopold's Congo Association. Now these treaties were written in languages the chiefs couldn't read, filled with legal jargon that would make a lawyer weep, and sealed with promises as empty as a politician's campaign speech. In exchange, the chiefs received a few yards of cloth, some beads, and maybe a rusty knife. Basically the colonial starter pack. They had no idea they were signing away sovereignty. To them it was more like, here's a gift, let's be friends. But to Leopold it was, thanks for your kingdom, I'll take it from here. Leopold wasn't the only one eyeing Africa like a buffet table. France, Britain, Germany, Portugal, they all wanted a slice. This land rush became known as the Scramble for Africa, and it was less of a dignified negotiation and more of a geopolitical Black Friday sale. To avoid a full-blown colonial food fight, the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 was convened. Picture a room full of European diplomats carving up Africa like a pizza, without inviting a single African to the table. Leopold showed up with charm, cunning, and a philanthropic mask, so convincing it could win an Oscar. He played the powers against each other, like a poker master bluffing with a pair of twos, and he won. The Congo River Basin, 8 times the size of Belgium, was handed to him as his personal playground. He renamed it the Congo Free State, which was ironic because it was neither free nor a state. It was a dictatorship disguised as a charity. Now that Leopold had his jungle empire, he needed to make it profitable. The world was rubber-hungry. Bicycles, cars, industrial machinery, and the Congo was dripping with it. But wild rubber wasn't easy to harvest. It required slashing vines, smearing sticky latex on your skin, and scraping it off like a cursed exfoliation ritual. To meet quotas, Leopold unleashed the force publique, his private army of conscripted Africans and mercenaries. Their job? Make sure the rubber flowed. Their tools? The Chicote whip, a hippo hide lash that could turn a man's back into hamburger meat, rifles, and machetes. Failure to meet quotas meant beatings, mutilation, or death. Villages were burned, families were torn apart, and then came the hands. Yes, hands. Soldiers had to prove they used bullets on humans, not animals, by bringing back severed hands. 1 bullet, 1 hand. It became a grotesque accounting system. If you missed your rubber quota, a basket of hands could pay the debt. Villages even waged war on each other to collect hands. Some were chopped off from corpses, others from the living. It was a macabre economy of flesh. Enter Leon Rom, the administrator of Stanley Falls and the human embodiment of a horror novel. Rom was so brutal, he made Vlad the Impaler look like a kindergarten teacher. He decorated his flower beds with severed heads, yes, actual heads, and kept a gallows outside his house like a lawn ornament. Rom's reign of terror was part of Leopold's grand plan: maximize profits, ignore morality, and pretend it was all for the good of civilization. The Congo was bled dry, its people enslaved, its resources pillaged, its forests echoing with screams. By the late 1880s, Leopold's rubber empire was looking less like a golden goose and more like a very expensive swamp. Turns out, building an empire from scratch, complete with roads, posts, and a private army of hand-chopping enforcers, costs a fortune. And while the Congo was bleeding rubber, it wasn't bleeding profits fast enough. So what did our enterprising monarch do? He turned to his own government like a teenager asking for gas money. In 1889 and again in 1895, Leopold borrowed hefty sums from Belgium. But this wasn't your average loan. Oh no. Leopold sweetened the deal with a clause. If he couldn't pay up, Belgium could annex the Congo in 1901. It was like mortgaging a haunted mansion with a clause that said, if I don't pay, you inherit the ghosts. But when 1901 rolled around, Belgium looked at the Congo, saw the severed hands, the scorched villages, and the PR nightmare, and said, you know what? We're good. So Leopold kept his jungle kingdom, and the exploitation continued like a rubber-fueled fever dream. Enter George Washington Williams, a Baptist minister, historian, and African-American trailblazer with a moral compass so strong it could redirect a hurricane. In 1890, Williams traveled to the Congo expecting to see civilization and progress. What he found was a dystopian nightmare. Villages razed, people mutilated, rubber quotas enforced with whips and bullets. Williams was horrified. He didn't just write a report. He penned an open letter to King Leopold, so scathing it could strip paint off a palace wall. He accused the king of crimes against humanity, stating that even though Leopold had never set foot in the Congo, the atrocities were committed in his name, making him just as guilty. It was the moral mic drop of the century. Tragically, Williams died on his journey home, and Leopold, ever the master of selective hearing, chose to ignore the accusations. After all, if the whistleblower dies, does the whistle still blow? But Williams lit a fuse. Soon, missionaries, journalists, and travelers began reporting similar horrors. By 1904, the European press exploded with revelations. The public was outraged. The Congo Free State was no longer a philanthropic paradise. It was exposed as a rubber-stained slaughterhouse. And then came the literary Avengers. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, turned his magnifying glass on Leopold's crimes and published The Crime of the Congo in 1909. Mark Twain, America's satirical sniper, wrote King Leopold's Soliloquy, a pamphlet where the king defends his actions with the kind of twisted logic that would make Machiavelli wince. Joseph Conrad, who had visited the Congo himself, wrote Heart of Darkness, a haunting novel that captured the psychological decay of imperialism. The character Kurtz, mad, brutal, and eloquent, may have been inspired by none other than Leon Rom, the flowerbed-decorating, gallows-loving administrator of Stanley Falls. By now, the death toll was staggering. Historians estimate that up to 10 million Congolese perished during the Congo Free State's existence, half the population. Whether by forced labor, famine, disease, or the Chicote whip, the cost of Leopold's fortune was paid in blood. Finally, in November 1908, the jig was up. International pressure, domestic shame, and a mountain of severed hands forced Belgium to act. The government stripped Leopold of his jungle fiefdom and annexed the Congo. On November 15th, the Congo Free State officially became a Belgian colony. Leopold died the following year, rich, reviled, and still insisting he had brought civilization to the Congo. His monuments still stand in Belgium, but history remembers him not as a builder of empires, but as a butcher in a crown. If you've been gripped by the twisted tale of King Leopold II and the Congo Free State, and you want more jaw-dropping, spine-tingling stories from history's darkest corners, follow us for more epic deep dives. Subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a moment of intrigue, scandal, or historical drama.